a pleasure to be at Legal Era India Conclave again, and happy to know that people have all not disappeared after lunch, and there are still some brave souls around. But we have an interesting topic, okay, a very, very interesting topic, a burning topic. We've got very experienced General Counsel with us to kind of navigate our way as we talk a little bit about foreign direct investment. And I think that's a topic which is quite interesting in terms of where we are as an economy and where we are heading forward. As we already have, we have Vani, we have Sadia and Ankur, and they, between them, probably have enormous amount of experience, both in terms of years, sectors, types of industries, types of size of industries and companies. So I think we are really going to have a great time talking to them. Just to kind of set the tone, I think India has been the beneficiary of a China plus one policy, and more when we talk to companies and industries abroad, we are always getting asked questions about India and what is there for India, and therefore I think we are going to be the beneficiaries over the next many years of this trend of there being an alternative to China, a viable one, and at the same time having the demographics, as our Prime Minister likes to talk about. Okay, we have a demographic dividend which is immense. Okay, and almost 20% of the world is now India, with the kind of population that we have. So I think there are certain things which are good, and if we are able to continue the same policies over the next 5 to 10 years, I think we'll really be in a good place. But at the same time, some of these policies and some of these issues need discussion, and that's what we are going to do. But before we start, what we're really going to do in this panel is we're going to break into kind of subtopics. We'll try and talk a little bit about each of these topics. We're going to start with, generally just development and current status of FDI. And all of you have been recipients of FDI or handled FDI. So Avani, let me start with you. And can you tell me what's been your experience in the last 15 or 20 years? I know G has been around for over 100 years in India. And I know what has been your experience with FDI, and what is your thought process on the current status of FDI and FDI policy? Can you give us some insights?
Yeah, hi. A very warm good afternoon to everyone in the room. I'm audible? I can start. So, I'll just go back to something I saw today morning in the newspapers, that Qatar has invested over 8,000 crores in Reliance Ventures. That's the number, and that's like headline news today. That's the impact of FDI that we have today in our economy. We don't talk about 100 crores, we talk about 1,000 crores. We're talking about that number. And this trend has been, going on from the days of the Congress government of Manmohan Singh, when they opened up in 1999 with the change in regulation. And today, FDI in India, if I would look at the numbers from the last, I would say 20 years, we are over $900 billion in FDI investment in India. That's a big number. And the top 5 countries which have really come up and invested heavily in India, very surprised, not much of a surprise to anyone. One of them is Singapore.
Really?
Yes. Singapore has invested over, I would say, 20% in the FDI stake in India, apart from Malaysia and many other countries. And various sectors, if you look at the FDI regime, and this is when I started my career, way back then, wherein as a junior attorney, you would be asked to look at press notes. We've all grown up looking at press notes,
Yes.
Going to DIPP offices, meeting the commissioners, getting clarifications, going to RBI, getting clarifications. And those were the time when all the multinational companies were coming in India. Now, today, if you look at the press notes then, the restricted sectors at that point of time and what they are today, it's a whole different conversation. The number of restricted sectors in India today has vastly reduced. And this is primarily because I have to give it to the government. They have constantly moved with the times. There was a time where aviation sector was restricted. Today, they have opened up that particular sector. There was a time where the banking sector was heavily regulated. That has opened up. Today, what we have regulated is online gaming. That's a new industry.
Yep.
So newer avenues, newer sectors, they're doing a pulse check on it. And the ones that were restricted at a certain point of time, like defense, like military, they have gradually started opening up. There's a very trend by the government to encourage investment, primarily because our consumer base has grown. And also they realize that the government of India in the last, I would say, 30 to 40 years is no longer the biggest employer in the country. It cannot be. So how do you sustain employment opportunities for this growing population? It is primarily through FDI. And if I would go back and speak about my experience and also the organization I represent, we have been in India, like you said, for over 100 years. And we've had very successful collaboration in various sectors which were restricted. One of them have been healthcare. We came up, we did a JV in the healthcare sector. We've had our JV with SBI cards, and we became one of the biggest, the most successful credit card companies in this sector. So all those reforms, I would say, that you see today, and we talk about today, those were challenges of the past.
I can understand.
When we came in, we were all the time seeking clarification from the regulator. We were pushing the regulator because we were facing challenges. I would say that, today, if you think a particular sector is restricted, they are not giving you the right platform, is also because the regulators themselves do not know how this entire place is going to span out. I don't think anyone anticipated the automobile sector to be what it is today.
I can understand, yeah.
There was a time there was only one Indian company.
Yep.
Today, there are more than one, but there are many other international players as well who are setting up shop in India. Also, very interestingly, we tend to look at FDI from a central point. I think FDI, we also need to look at it from a state perspective. The state governments have been biggest revenue churners for the government of India, and also because the states have encouraged FDI. They have come up with policies across to encourage industry setup. And to give you a very surprising example, not many people would know that Maharashtra, Gujarat, as well as
Tamil
Nadu and
Yes.
Karnataka,
Yeah.
they have the highest investment of FDI, and also Delhi.
Delhi, yeah, I'm very, very surprised.
Delhi is one of the top 5.
Okay.
And it's actually in the IT space.
Really?
Yes, it is.
Is it Delhi or Delhi NCR?
Delhi NCR.
Okay, that's
So
excellent.
it is. So the point I'm trying to make is because the government realized that there are avenues for expansion. Look at what Maharashtra was, I would say, 30 years back. We set up our first multimodal factory across the world.
Okay.
The first one in 2011 in Pune. And it was all thanks to the government and their support, and also the tax incentives that companies like us received.
Yeah.
So all in all, I would say FDI, what we think about it in terms of economy, in terms of numbers, it is the way forward. There is still so much of growth, so much of opportunity, be it looking at retail branding, be it looking at newer companies coming in, like my
Sure.
co-panelists are going to be. It's not just manufacturing, it's not just the automobile industry, but a lot more newer avenues are coming up for FDI in India.
Great, excellent. So it's been a very good journey. We've had a bit of few bumps, but what you're saying is that what we started 15, 20 years ago to where we are, there's definitely a huge improvement and a huge increase in how it. Just to kind of add to one thing, I was recently in Japan, and suddenly I was to meet someone in the Indian embassy, and it got rescheduled, only to know that Tamil Nadu as a government is coming and doing a roadshow in Japan with respect to getting investment. So that's the kind of things that we're probably seeing. We're probably having healthy competition between the states in order to be able to go get investments into that. And I think that's just like the corporate. I think the government is learning about KPIs and KRAs and all of these things. You are the finance minister, investment minister, you have a KPI, go and get me this much of investment. Probably that's something that is really happening behind the scenes.
Well, I can say it happens not just with the state governments very actively competing for investors to come. There, like you said, there are roadshows regularly happening, but they're even within the central ministries.
Yeah.
They want to have that conversation, and
Sure.
we've been the recipient of that from the Ministry of Railways. We did the first loco deal for GE Transportation. So we've seen the economy from being restricted to being opened up
I
to
can
encourage investments.
Excellent, very good. I'm going to move to Sadia. Sadia, welcome, and we'd love your perspective. You've been a corporate commercial lawyer, and now you're part of a PE fund investment, PE VC fund, investing in exciting areas in India. What's your experience, and what are your thoughts with respect to the impact that FDI is having on the startup ecosystem, and generally with respect to the new technologies and new areas that are developing?
So, hi, good afternoon, everybody. Vani spoke about the last 15 years and 20 years. I have seen a surge in the last just 8 years that I have been in this venture capital world. A huge amount of activity, a lot of investments coming into India. So many new funds have come up. We, as an investment fund, we continue to look up to India in a very positive way. We are Eight Roads is a fidelity-backed fund, and we look at India very positively. We are on a fourth fund which is dedicated only to investment into India. So the future is definitely looking up. It's definitely positive. It's only going to move, way ahead and beyond where we are today. The startup ecosystem has seen a huge boom in the last 7-8 years. Largely because of the government policies, to encourage the startups, the local policies, and of course the relaxation in a lot of the FDI norms. We continue, liberalization is an evolving process, and we continue to liberalize, and looking at the need of the hour, the world is coming around things. I think the economy is slowly opening its doors to even sectors which were restricted at one point in time, and it's only getting relaxed with every passing year. So we've seen a huge boost in fintech investment, largely because of fintech being open to 100% FDI, which earlier was not the case. Today, if you're just a regulated financial services provider, then you can get 100% foreign direct investment. The fintech world saw a great boom, and there was a huge surge in foreign funding. Tech, of course, continues to, the SaaS-based companies, etc., continue to attract a lot of interest in India. India has always been, some kind of a tech hotbed. From being a back office to supplying IT outside, we now have our own homegrown, technology, business which is working very well. We've seen a lot of e-commerce activities also happening. We've seen a lot of hyperlocal businesses, deliveries, which got a lot of funding a couple of years back, and that sort of gave a huge boost to the whole hyperlocal ecosystem. So the outlook is definitely positive. So many startups in India now. I don't think it was the case 10, 15 years back. Smaller businesses are coming up because there is availability of funds. Foreign investors are looking at India as a very positive market. There is a lot of fund to be deployed, and and with the regulatory regime, it's becoming easier to do that. Foreign investment is obviously a far more. It's not just about foreign investors are not just bringing funds to the table, but when you get foreign funding, you also get a sort of a motley of a lot of other experiences.
Yeah, exactly. You bring a certain level of maturity to anything once you have this FDI coming in. So an ecosystem which is only dependent on Indian capital, apart from the liquidity issues, you also get a lot of other fringe benefits.
Correct.
One of the key things being that we always had system previously before the startup ecosystem, where you'd have a company invest in a company in India. There will be an acquisition or two, but it'll really be just building the company on. But with startup, you're able to get a lot more interesting aspects. You can have minority stakes, you have control stakes, you have full acquisitions, you have spin-off buyouts, and so on and so forth. And all of these, I think, contribute tremendously. So so I think all of that kind of adds to that. Yeah,
correct. You get a lot of global experience
exactly.
That's brought to these companies. They get a lot of exposure to what the world in other what countries in other parts of the world are doing. So you get connected to a larger set of people in the ecosystem, not just at the India level, but also, outside of India. So those are multiple benefits of, getting foreign investments. Of course, employment being
Of course,
one of the key driving factors here. But yeah, a lot of, like, when we invest, it's not just, we just don't invest and we're not just done. We
Yeah.
also have to take the company to the next level. So we are very involved investors who will ensure that all the systems are put in place. It may be a startup, it may be a stage, a very early stage company, but we will really handhold them to move to the next level. So these are the advantages of foreign funding that today the startup world is enjoying, and that's and it's a great time to be in India and to set up a business.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And Ankur, coming back to you, you are in a day one company, the biggest startup in the world. Okay, and but I know you've been an experienced lawyer. Sometimes a little difficult, and you've been busy to catch up with. But I know all the stuff that you've experienced over the years. So just from your experience, from your personal experience, what are your thoughts about FDI, and what's been the impact on the business ecosystem in India?
Thank you, Legal Era, for inviting me. A standard disclaimer: the views are only personal, so no affiliation with my company. I think I would say FDI is a very critical catalyst for nurturing any sector. I think Vani started about saying that liberalization happened in the Congress regime, and after that, the big bets have started in the FDI. You pick up any sector. So when I say it's a critical catalyst, earlier, as Badri was saying, right, the only source of capital was Indian money. Now, once the FDI started opening up, you have multiple ways. You have strategic investors coming in. You have PE funds, VC funds, family offices, sovereign funds. And now the entrepreneurs or the ecosystem participants have a choice to shop around and get multiple types of FDI. What FDI does is that they bring, I think the team covered, some of the important aspects. I think the biggest is experience and tech behind investments. So whenever you have global players investing in the country in a sector, they not only bring capital with them, they bring experience of what's happening in emerging countries, what is already established in an organized country, and they bring tech to be able to multiply the growth of the sector. So what happens in the process is not only capital is accessible, there's a lot of experience which is accessible, and that generates a lot of positive confidence in the ecosystem partners like your bankers, supply chain partners, so on and so forth. So FDI is just a starting of a revolution which may start for that particular sector, specifically for that company in that use case. Now, the important point in terms of what it contributes, right? It contributes a flywheel effect. So what happens is some foreign investor comes and take a bet on a company, specifically maybe on the innovative part of the company, and that bets translate into a growing commitment on innovation, a growing commitment on employment, a growing commitment on developing multiple things around that. It could be upskilling, it could be so on and so forth. So in my view, the transformation capability of FDI with the choices available is humongous, is big enough to be able to take any sector from 0 to 100. Any sector you pick up in India, whether it is automobiles, it is the telecom for that matter, as well as the banking sector, retail is also going through the same process. All of that have gone through it, and I think as a country, we have sufficiently benefited from FDI coming in and letting the sectors evolve to the best of their capabilities, as much as some of the companies are FOCC structures in the country because of the easy access to FDI. So in that sense, I think it's a very critical and important catalyst to actually enable the sector to flourish to the maximum capabilities.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think it's been a good overview of where we are with respect to this. I want to move to something that I'm sure all of us have. I mean, no one is perfect, they say, and India by no means is perfect. So Sadia, can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the issues that you face, especially from an FDI context, especially in your startup space?
So, I think it could be, if I can be technical, little
course,
technical, one of the issue under FDI is that when you invest in India, you have to invest at fair market value, and when you exit, you have to exit at the fair market value. Now, when investors evaluate a business, they sometimes, especially at a very early stage, you see, if you just look at the fair market value, it will be very low. So you tend to give a premium to that business, and you rate it much more than the fair market value. Now, this today has become a little bit of challenge for Indian companies because when you pay more than the fair market value, that there is an angel tax which has been introduced, which means the company gets taxed. It's sort of a notional profits in the hands of the company. So these kind of challenges are sort of coming up. Another valuation challenge which comes up that we often face as a venture capital investor is, how do you get your anti-dilution or your liquidation preference out? In the world outside of India, in the VC world, anti-dilution is a very critical aspect, commercial term of your investment. As I said, you value the businesses at a premium. So going forward, if certain things don't work in a certain way, you would want to be able to adjust your valuation. There are some limitations, at least in the Indian regime, because again, you cannot go below the fair market value that you have. And now with the angel tax, even the keeping a gap between the fair market value and the premium that you're paying is posing as a challenge because it means tax in the hands of the company. Another challenge we often face as investors is, when you invest, the company has to make certain filings and you have to get some kind of a unique identification number. And that unique identification number is which you need even when you are exiting the company. Now, everything today has gone online, and it's still the smooth working of the system is sort of yet to
get reflected.
Yeah. So those we have, because we have made certain exits where we went through a lot of problems on account of this. So these are more technical glitches, I would say, at least on this side. Secondly, is sometimes you may think that a sector is 100%. Sorry.
No.
Physical forms are challenge.
Yeah. Even those were that was a challenge, and now the online filing is a challenge as well. Secondly, sometimes certain sectors may be under 100% under automatic route, but there may be certain conditionalities attached to the sector. So talking from our experience, like it could be possible that a single brand brand SBRT company suddenly has got foreign investment and obviously is under 100% automatic route. But tomorrow, as they go on raising more and more funds, they cannot, the moment the foreign funding is more than 50%, then they have to meet the 30% local sourcing of material, etc. So you have to be very mindful of those things. So you can't just so your expansion when it comes to receiving foreign funding to that extent is curtailed, and you at least have to keep in mind that even if you are going beyond a certain limit, I think some companies do tend to lose that track sometimes.
Of course.
And by then maybe the business has already settled into a very, very nice
rhythm.
You don't remember that, oh, okay, fine, now I'm at 52% and now I need to think about local sourcing and all my, so those kind of challenges we often see. I think another challenge that we see is sometimes, I don't know, I used to find the FIPB, at least there was...
I think she's saying good things about FIPB.
I find it a little more confusing now that you have different departments you have to go to and deal with.
Yeah.
I thought that FIPB was more of a single window clearance. I don't know if anyone feels differently about that.
I think there are very, very strong views about FIPB. So I think we'll leave it at that.
So those kind of things. Yeah.
No, I think, it's very interesting. And I think, Ankur, will come to you. And I do want to come to angel tax a little later. But I want to talk to you about, what are the regulations and changes that have affected, FDI in general. And what's been your perspective on this?
Again, I think I would like to answer this on principle. I think to give it to the regulators, right, they do a very hard job of balancing the capital requirement versus the socio-economic balance in the country, right? So one side, they're trying to enable the FDI to come in, which can let the sector prosper. But at the same time, they are obligated to prevent the domestic part, which could either be, for example, and the mop guys, it could be the medium-sized businesses, right? So if you look at it from a regulatory perspective, they're trying to balance this both. And therefore, whenever they take decisions, some decisions may be willingly acceptable, some decisions may be hard. The only difference could be that if there could be a proactive engagement on decision-making versus the setup stage, I think as she said, we have to keep track of 50% and then we have to start making changes. If this could be proactive, that can help ease the part. For example, some of those, right? there is about a lot of noise around Press Note 3, where a lot of startup ecosystem who were depending on a particular country to get money suddenly were throttled in that sense. So there was a lot of churn around that. But again, the point was, what are the regulators balancing, and maybe the prioritization changed for right or wrong reasons, I don't know, but that just caused a concern. Similarly, there could be parity issues on principles, right? For example, there could be TDS and TCS for an e-commerce transaction, but there is no corresponding thing on the physical side. So which means if a seller is choosing to sell online, he's going to block 2% of its working capital for every transaction. And then you know how to wait to get your TDS or TCS. So those are parity issues. So I'm answering it on principle to say whenever these changes are happening, I'm sure these guys are looking at the broader picture, but that creates a churn on some of the businesses, specifically ones who are established or in the process of getting established. The churn is higher. I think the latest is the tax on the gaming companies, which has created some churn around that.
I understand. And I think I want to just come to Vani. I know we spoke a little bit about tax, but I think structural and regulatory changes and impact that's had on FDI, if you can just throw some light on that.
See, like I mentioned previously also, FDI, when it opened up in various sectors, there were few regulations in there. And one of the regulations, restrictions I would say, was that you need to have an Indian partner. Now that's a marriage which went sour for quite a few, and we have umpteen examples across. Even though we've had some very good, I would say, marriages but the fact is that when it comes for the foreign investor to exit or to up their stake, they receive major pushbacks from the regulators, because there is that, I would say, very natural feeling for the government to give that protection to the Indian companies. And rightfully so, because we need to protect, we need to nurture the Indian ecosystem as well. We need to encourage the startup industry. So a lot of time we've seen that with these JVs, with these investments, there have been very sour experiences, not just for, I would say, private institutional players, but also governments have been involved. In various sectors where the stakes have been very high, governments have taken such a negative position at that point of time that wherein it just looked like that sector is never going to take off. And today when we see that sector, it is a completely different ballgame. Like the aviation sector.
I know. Yeah.
Commercial aviation, if we look at in the last 15 years, we've seen some dramatic entries, exits.
Yeah.
And now we are talking a different conversation altogether. So, and it gets more complicated with the institutional investors getting involved, the foreign investors getting involved with IBC, and all those different regulations they play up. Even the regulators who are not directly linked to FDI, they also have a role to play, because today these businesses are flourishing. Some are flourishing, some are facing challenges. So the ones which are flourishing, they often get a challenge from super regulators like CCI. So foreign investments come, when it comes in India, they already have a lot of learning. They come because they are experienced in various markets. They come from a dominant position at times, and which is viewed very restrictively by CCI. So always there is that, I would say, there's a sort of bias, if I can use the word for the lack of term. There's a bias that is there in the mindset of the regulator when it comes to foreign investors in a particular sector. And that is not always very conducive to business.
I understand. Yeah. So I think that's a very interesting a point that you make. And it's an interesting segue to kind of talk a little bit more about regulators and process that is there. And we're gonna stay with you and talk a little bit about that. But one quick thing, a couple of things that I think we mentioned when we spoke and previously, and people are kind of speaking about it. Sometimes we're very good with kind of getting the regulation out and talking about it, but in terms of making it workable, we sometimes struggle. For example, our NCLT maybe doesn't as well function, because the whole thought process was to kind of reduce the burden on high courts and come to NCLT. We got some investigation. What are your thoughts? What are things that can be done a little better by this, merely than just changing and putting a policy in place? And we'll come to the regulators in a minute, because I think you've got so much of experience with regulators. We must tap into that. But tell us a little bit. Can you just give us like 2 sentences on some of the things that can be done better by India when it comes to execution?
I think what is very important is that we should when we come up with a new policy, a new structure, when we set up institutions like NCLT, NCLAT, any tribunal, we should not derail from the fundamental purpose why it's been set up. We do understand that the economy is growing. There are more challenges that the economy is going to face as it grows. But when you add on more powers to a tribunal, it somewhat dilutes the purpose of why it was originally made. Like for NCLT now, NCLT has a rush, has a huge backlog because of IBC matters.
Of course.
IBC, nobody anticipated it to
Be so
mushroom the way it has today. Now, even to get your matter listed, it is a challenge.
Yep.
And the benches, even though, and there are constant restructurings happening in the benches, they are very active benches, but then a lot of times there are appointments which are delayed for various administrative reasons. It becomes a huge issue for foreign investors and also for the foreign investors to understand how India works. Generally, we have been working for the last, I would say, 20-25 years to move away from the notion that India is all about red tapeism, very nothing moves, bureaucracy. The government is making a very conscious effort to change the image of the country, and I think all of us are catalysts to that change. But when a regulator or authority adds on more powers to their own roles because they are also growing and evolving, they do eventually slow down. And that again goes back to the same question, why did you set up this authority?
Yep.
Wherein I will still be waiting for 1 year for my matter to be listed.
Sure. And again, so I think that's a great point. We want to tap into your experience with dealing with regulators, okay? Because in India, whether you like it or not, if you're investing, even if it's 100% FDI, regulators and different regulators are very, very important. Can you throw some light with respect to dealing with regulators, some of the best practices that you have felt and what's worked for you?
See, I think in my experience,
we love stories also, by the way. Okay. So,
I'm not sure whether I can tell you many stories due to confidentiality reasons. But one thing I would say, from my experience, the regulator today appreciates a direct talk. They want the institutional investor, they want the foreign investor to sit across the table and have a direct conversation. They get very, I would say, averse to having consultants represented.
really?
They were like, why do
we
you
are
need...
we are so fair. We are so unbiased. We are so good.
We are actually
we never put our
struggling
case
to get
more than what
a
we
direct,
need.
we are struggling to get a direct.
So yeah, I think why don't you tell us
meeting
about
as well.
your dialogues that you've had with
Yeah,
this thing?
So obviously, as she said, even I can't, disclose much. But with a certain regulator, we have been facing a lot of challenges. Very, very lax response. They don't want to meet us. Of course, they don't want to meet consultants. But even a direct meeting is very, very difficult. I think what we are dealing with, it has been now over a year, and we haven't yet got the blessing for which we had approached them. And as I speak right now, I don't even know.
At least for
what's
once, we
happening.
can say we as lawyers are not at fault. Okay, at least we can say that. But I think I understand.
I think there should be some there should be some ability to sort of get an appointment and, to meet them and to understand how they are thinking and what the timelines, etc. will be. I think it will be very helpful.
So I will come to you in a minute.
It's not very formal.
Ankur, what are your thoughts on the decision making and policy framework?
I think on the positive side, things are changing.
Okay.
I think the government did some lateral hires, and we experienced that. So the learning abilities of the lateral hires is far higher as compared to the other set of folks. And that has brought some fresh change in the ability for them to understand the business complexities. I think it's an evolving journey. It's on the right way. It's on the positive way. I think it will take time to evolve because the businesses are today, new age, are complex enough, right? So we should also appreciate that fact on our side. So they will take time and we should adjust to that, although the dialogue is now on as compared to some of the difficult times she's talking about.
So Sadia, you need to take notes from these two on the panel. So they are doing something right, okay? So I think we should learn from them. But again, Ankur, I'm just going to hold on to you because we're getting the last part of it and we're going to finish in a rush. Predictions for sectors. We just want to make it a little exciting in the end, like fastest fingers first kind of a thing. Okay. Predictions for different sectors. You've been involved personally and you've been following different sectors. What are some of your predictions for some key sectors?
I think it's simple, right? If you look at your purse and if you have 100 rupees to spend, where will the customer spend? And that's what the boom is all about. So start from your groceries, starts to your consumables, your kitchen, all of those, and then you spend on some other products like insurance, healthcare, so on and so forth. I think those sectors are going to boom anyway as they get organized. So today, a lot of them are organized, and the foreign money will come to make them help organize. I think that is all which is up for stake.
Okay, thanks. I'm coming to you. You had some early dips on startup ecosystem. Okay, can you give us your predictions? What are the things are likely? Which sectors are likely to be there, and what are your experiences with respect to some of the sectors?
So fintech obviously is the new age, hot.
But I don't know what
sector.
fintech is. Fintech seems to be like a, 100
Basically
headed hydra.
tech-based
Okay.
financial services which are being
Okay.
offered to to a lot of traditional financial companies into financial services. So fintech definitely has seen a surge. I mean, though on the local regulatory front, I think the regulations are still sort of evolving, and they're still being developed, because it's something which has come up in the last couple of years, and in some of the companies we've seen that the government still is coming up with consultation papers on things like FLDG model and peer-to-peer lending, etc. So it's evolving. At least in the last, I think that's why in the last 1 year or so there's been a little bit of dip. A little bit of restraint. Funds are showing in investing into the so-called fintech sector. Because RBI is still sort of formulating a lot of policies around it, but it will continue to grow. The tech platforms obviously will continue to grow, and we've also seen a lot of tech being applied to healthcare. That's something we are seeing up quite a bit in the early business in the ecosystem. We've seen tech devices being set up for physiotherapy, and use of softwares to analyze your physical balance and things, etc. And those companies are also, like, tech being applied to the healthcare sector is something which I think will be also seeing.
Tell us
a lot
about
of
D2C
boost.
brands now quickly. D2C brands, consumer brands. Do you see any challenges, issues from that perspective?
I think it will continue to grow, and I don't really see too many challenges in the D2C, at least as of now. Apart from the fact that you have to keep in mind, those different conditions that are being applied to you, even though you are under 100%
Understood.
automatically.
No problem at all. Vani, coming to you. Okay, some interesting and heavy duty sectors. What do you have to say in your defense, if I may say, about this?
Well, we're very happy with the defense sector and the aviation sector. I think it's been a trailblazing initiative by the government of India for the F414 engines, and the government looking at collaborating with getting new technology in the country is a very positive move. Also, the fact that, the traditional sector, the power sector, there's been a shift from the traditional sources to now renewable sources, and the government is doing their bit to encourage it. We see a lot of talk about decarbonization. We see a lot of conversation around renewable sources, about wind components. India wants to be the biggest wind component manufacturer in the next 10 to 20 years, and the government is big time investing into it. So we can see that now there's a shift from coal. They're looking at renewable source of energy, which is an area of interest to us, and also in the transmission and distribution sector. They are heavily invested, even though, there was a point where everyone thought that these sectors would reach, they would hit a plateau.
Saturation, yeah.
But however, there's been a shift across the globe. There's been a shift to renewable energies, and the government is really very big on it.
Very
so
nice.
it just makes us very happy that the government is moving with the times. They're opening up, and I think credit to the government, because they are they're just not invested calling people in India. However, they're promoting India outside of India.
Okay.
So when you have governments go across the world, do that initiative, they also take very big feedback And that's why you are having these policies, reforms, regulations in place to compete with other governments.
Of course, because everyone wants to have a piece of the pie,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. And I think India does not want to be behind in that race.
In renewables, what are you seeing? Where do you think? So, for example, solar has had its fair share of issues, both from a regulatory as also from a tax, from a custom duty point of view. The structures are not that great with respect to that. But you've been around for so long. Wind has had its ups and downs. Some of the wind farms which were put in place 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they don't generate the same kind of IRR that they used to do earlier and all. So what's been your experience? So tell us a little bit more about renewables and generally what is your long-term view, and how should the government kind of look at it, and how FDI can really support that?
So, interestingly, the government did dabble quite a bit in solar energy. However, they also realized very quickly that it's not going the way they anticipated it to go. So, there has been a new policy that they have been working around for renewables. In fact, last year, we participated in a white paper with and presented it to the government on the renewable policy changes that we were recommending for setting up wind farms, because we thought the traditional models that the government has been working on, it does not work any longer.
Yeah.
There has to be a different model of looking at it. There has to be a very active talk of decarbonization, active talk of sustainability.
Of course.
Because there was very limited scope on sustainability. So when they look at those different standards and they've started implementing it. So today the conversation you have on ESG for listed entities making disclosures, it started as that what are we supposed to do? Now
Sure.
It's a conversation that it's not about what are we supposed to do. This is the way you do it. The Basel norms, they have improvised it several times and they've come up with it. And they've also taken industry feedback. The good thing with the government, I would say with the regulator, today, if you compare it from yesterday in our experiences, the government is very active in taking feedback.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. You've been, again, obviously, you've been able to have a better dialogue, and you've been able to kind of better fly on the wall kind of a situation.
It may be just a one-off
No, not at all.
experience.
I have the same experience as you. So it's kind of hard to kind of go and tell them that you're wrong or this needs to change. So as someone who's kind of done both on the corporate side as also on the tax side, talking to the government is like pulling nails, okay? But obviously some people are better at it than others. So Vani, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with respect to this.
So,
Because the sector that you kind of look at is also sector which, it's quite tough. And I really like your enthusiasm about the fact that, you've still been able to look at it and you've got a very positive outlook about this. So tell us a little bit more about this.
See, when I speak about my experience, I speak about from private practice
Of course,
as well,
of
because
course.
in private practice, I have dealt with the erstwhile FIPB many billions of times. One thing I have seen with the regulator, with the government, and like I mentioned, it's always best to have a direct conversation. Secondly, if I can say a little tip, there is nothing called an informal conversation.
Okay.
Just because you do not take anything in writing, it is not an informal conversation. Whenever you go to the regulator, to the authority, to even seek a very minor clarification, please remember that you're having a formal conversation and you must go well prepared. Do not send in casual queries, casual remarks, because there is always a way they're going to track it back to you.
Understood.
A lot of times I've seen companies sending their, innocent queries.
Yeah.
And and when I say innocent query, that's a remark made by a very senior government official. You think you send consultants with innocent, cute queries, and we do not know what you're asking us. So, the regulator is very smart. They know that if you are scratching the surface 2 years ahead in time before even thinking of coming to India. So they know what you're talking about. They are very smart people over there sitting in the government, and we must know that. And a lot of times now, gone are those days where people are just from bureaucracy. There are people who've moved from where we are to the government side.
course.
So they exactly know the conversation you want to have. The point is that if there is an issue, there has to be, you need to accept that there is as much you can push as a private player.
Understood.
There is, and you need to respect it. However, at the same time, I would say you should very transparently lay out your concerns very smartly. I would say use the industry forums to convey the message. It's not, sometimes, usually it happens that what you are facing in a particular sector is not your problem alone.
Of course.
Your peers are also facing the same problem.
Yeah.
So if there is a product incentive scheme which I want to be implemented, I want 10 other
People also to be.
so, why not have that, I would say, conversation with the government at the right platforms of FICCI, of CII,
Understood.
and utilize those opportunities to get a policy change. It is very difficult to say, let's have a policy. It's very easy to say, and sitting over here, let's have a policy change.
Of course.
It has taken, at times, more than 20 years for a policy to change.
Yeah.
But the good
And
thing
that's
is
an
it has
important.
changed.
Yeah, and you've been at it. The more important thing is to be not be disheartened. It's not happening instantaneously. That it'll take time.
Absolutely. and
Sometimes it's
also-
glacial, but you still have to put up with it.
And to make not just the regulator understand, but
Sure.
also your internal stakeholder, your global
Understood.
counterparts to understand that why India is such a difficult market. That I think as in-house attorneys, it's a very big challenge, even for external firms, to give the right picture and
Yeah.
not to paint a disheartening picture, or not to paint a very, I would say, rosy picture when none exists.
Of course. Okay, closing remark. I know they're already looking at me and glaring at me. So quickly, a word of advice, just one word. I mean, not what I meant is a very quick word. A word of advice for prospective and current investors in the current market. Sadia, shall we go with you?
You're welcome. Please come and invest. It's an overall a very favorable regime. Obviously, the government is inviting investors to come. The regulations have been made much more favorable in view to attract funding.
Of course.
And that's the overall feel, and that's how it is. Obviously, there'll be some hurdles and there'll be some glitches, but that will always be there in any jurisdiction you go to.
Of course.
And yes, we are a market which is still, not seeing the
You have lots to
downturn,
give.
which a lot of other markets in the world are seeing. So,
Sure. Ankur?
I think if you ask one word, it's a long-term patient game. If you are a serious investor, specifically a strategic one, take a very long sigh before you enter India and be patient. Success will be for sure there. All the sectors which have evolved are a proof that this will get evolved to a fully operational automatic route. But please have patience once you start investing in India.
Vani?
Well, I agree with what both my panelists have said. It's perseverance, patience, and having the right approach. This in the last 20 years, I've seen surprises in sectors which have never opened up. So today, when we look
Can you
at
give us an example?
aviation, defense.
Okay.
So what else do I say? Retail branding. We've never heard of these sectors. I did not think they'll ever open up in my lifetime. So
No,
now
we wanted specific example of a surprise. Yeah,
pharma opened up.
That's
So-
a good surprise, yes.
So when that can happen, there's still so much to be done. There's so much to be achieved. And I think it's very important to have a positive outlook. However, not to lose your patience in
Of
that
course.
long run.
No problem. Thank you so much again. I think it's been wonderful to have all of you on this panel. And we're open for questions. Just again, I'm the moderator. I'm happy to direct the questions to my panelists. But anyone has any questions for the panel? Yes, we got one question here.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Varun from Luthra. Very interesting points about how our regulators are trying to balance protectionism while still trying to, get as much FDI into the country. We just wanted, some more insights from your experiences on dealing with Press Note 3. The import of that restriction is just so wide. And, even though it says it's countries bordering India, it has extended to jurisdictions such as Hong Kong as well. So just some thoughts on how you've dealt with that and how you have sought clarity from the regulator.
PN3, anyone wants to take dips on this?
I don't think I've dealt with that. So
You're most lucky. So PN3, I think, is an interesting one. And I think it's got a deeper connotation to it than we have. So we've kind of dealt with PN3 a few times now. And I think it's one of those areas where the regulator wants to keep it ambiguous. Because the minute you put certain guardrails, knowing the neighboring country, you'll find someone who'll kind of put something together which will satisfy that. Okay. So I think government wants to have a lot more discretion. Of course, it's having a very negative impact with respect to investments from that country. And we all know how we suffer and those long calls you've had with investor, because Today, Chinese money is invested across the whole world. So we've had companies in Canada who got some Chinese investment who are saying, hey, PN3 is applicable to me. Hopefully over time, it'll get this thing. But there are certain areas where I think the government, for whatever reason, perception-wise, policy-wise, strategically, doesn't want to put its hand out. Online gaming is an example. Okay, crypto is another example where, the regulatory regime around it, we have not clarified, but we are taxing them out of the country. Okay, there are other instances where non-regulatory ambiguity has been an active tool to discourage FDI and kind of have a different basket which is there. Is it a good thing? I don't think so. I think it's always good to kind of clarify certain roles, because that gives you ability to kind of at least set certain things in place. But that's where we live in. I think there's a certain level of ambiguity that we need to live with in some areas. Any other questions?
Do we have more questions? I think that's it.
Okay, I think we are out of questions. Such a clear panel, such a simple topic. Huh? So thank you so much again, all of you, for patiently listening to us. But of course, wonderful to have all of you on the panel as always. Thank you so much.